With a much less impressive background than you, I feel very background underdressed.
I have a dream this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire has more followers and engagement, many times more than the New York Times or CNN. That is a problem for democracy.
With all due respect, that's a bunch of malarkey.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Democracy simply doesn't work.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
It's the Ricochet Podcast. I'm James Lalix. Rob Long, Peter Robinson are here, and we're all going to talk to Douglas Murray, who's got a great new book, The War on the West. So let's have ourselves a podcast.
I can hear
you! Welcome, everybody. It's the Ricochet Podcast, number 597. Wow. Will we get to 600? I don't know. Something's going to happen between now and then. It's an uncertain world, but probably so. You can make sure that we do, by the way, by going to Ricochet.com, joining up and be part of the most stimulating conversations and community on the web, where we talk about everything. And as you might well imagine, we're talking about the thing that bedevils the nation the most, according to some, not according to others. I'm joined by Peter Robinson and Rob Long. Peter in California, Rob in New York, I presume.
I am, in fact, in New York.
Oh, good. And Peter, where else would you be but lovely California, which unfortunately is not going to have the governor that we thought, but that's a conversation for a bit later. Obviously, we got to talk about the hearings. It is possible, let me posit this, to be disgusted at absolutely everybody. At Trump for the statements and the actions, at the yahoos, the cretins, the Q-addled morons who thought that by walking around stealing a coat rack, they were going to change an election and overthrow a government, and the progressives who winked and waved at an actual bloody, fiery insurrection that gripped the country in 2020 in city after city after city, and now seem to be going their usual route, which is not to ask for jail or punishment, but to just sit and wait until the people responsible for these things end up with what they truly deserve, which is tenure. So that's where we are, a pox on all houses. Or is that just whataboutism and both sidesism and the rest of the things that keep people from taking a stance one way or the other? I don't know.
That strikes me as a very good summary and just about all that the January 6th committee meeting is worth. Just a pox on both their houses. Not a word. We now know that in the first 2 years of the Trump administration, the Russian hoax was started by the Hillary Clinton campaign, pursued in a manner that was at a minimum outrageously improper and unethical by the FBI, but very likely, well, we know we have one FBI agent who has already pled guilty to altering a document. So we have the corruption of our intelligence agencies, or at least one of the intelligence and law enforcement agencies in the FBI. Not a word about that. Not a word about that. I'm with you. I'm not suggesting that January 6th deserves any praise, but and now we have Chuck Schumer some months ago on the steps of the Supreme Court calling out Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Gorsuch by name, and saying, I can't remember the words precisely, but the paraphrase is, you're in trouble now.
You will pay a price.
You will pay a price. Thank you very much. You will pay a price. And now a heavily armed young man has been arrested outside Justice Gorsuch's house, and he admitted that he was there to take a shot at a Supreme Court justice. Not a word about that. Not a word about that last night.
It was a mostly peaceful attempt, though, because he didn't actually do anything.
Attempt, right.
He didn't do anything. Right. And Peter, if Hillary Clinton had been successful in getting Trump tossed out, not elected because of the Russia thing, then our democracy would not be in peril because of what Trump subsequently did. Don't you get it? I mean, she was kind of right, wasn't she? The means, okay, we can argue about that, but she was trying to save the country from the specter of Trump. No, nobody's not talking. Russiagate has gone down the memory hole completely. Rob, your thoughts on this? I can imagine.
Well, I'm mindful of the fact that if you're listening to this podcast and you are not a member of Ricochet, we really do need you because we have a gigantic lawsuit to pay off. My thoughts on Trump, I'm sure, has cost our little company some members. People who love Trump don't like to hear bad things about him. There are only two ways to look at this, right? I mean, because it's not urgent, obviously. If it was urgent, it would have happened a year ago or a year and a half ago. Right. So it's clearly done for two reasons, one of two, right? History which I mean, a quaint idea. The actual job of Congress to have a record and historical record, or politics. So as a matter of history, I'm not sure it's a very good one. I mean, I'm not arguing whether or not. None of this was new to me, I guess.
That's right.
Even catching it up in the newspaper. All of it seemed horrible at the time, as you recall, for me, and continues to seem horrible, and in many ways disqualifying for more than one political figure I can think of. Not just Trump, but I believe his coterie of eunuchs in the Senate.
I saw a coterie of eunuchs play open for Prince.
They were really good, by the way. That's back when they sold out, right? But as a matter of politics, like, it feels to me like, if you just put your Democratic hat on for a minute, like what else can you do? Like it isn't like you can have a celebration on the White House lawn for the accomplishments of the Biden presidency or the triumphs of this, benighted Congress. You have nothing. This is the only era you got, and you got to fire it, and you got to fire it as close to November as you possibly can and hope that it hits something. And I just don't think it did. So I think it failed as a matter of politics, but I think it also failed as a matter of history. I mean, I remember Labor Day 1998, maybe? Was it when the Starr Report came out? Remember the Starr Report?
Yes.
How old were you? Mm-hmm. Three old men are talking about the Starr Report. That was the report that an independent counsel released investigating the Clinton administration, Bill Clinton especially, for improprieties and for pressure and for a lot of other stuff. And when that came out, it was published in the New York Times. And people bought the time. I remember I was waiting. I was in line trying to get a ferry somewhere, and I was way, way in the back, and I was going to be there. Everyone was sitting, waiting for the ferry, but they're all on their roof, leaning against the hood of their car with the newspaper spread out, drinking a cup of coffee. And it seemed to me like a printed book or a printed something is what you do when you want something to be in history. Primetime TV specials, what you do when you want something to be politically powerful. But if you're the Democrats in 2022, I feel like they're missing the mark. They should have printed. They should have printed the report. And it's incendiary as you want. You can have all the pictures and all. I mean, the transcripts and the Trump administration figures are what damned the Trump administration last night. You could easily do that in a book. And then if you want to have a primetime special, have one about all of your successes. But if you don't have any, you're kind of stuck. So that's
you're saying this is like the summer replacement variety show that the networks used to do back in the 70s. It's like the January 6th is like the Hudson Brothers.
The Watergate hearings, we really didn't know.
That's true.
I mean, you didn't know how it was going to turn out. You didn't know what happened. You didn't know. It was an actual investigation into the hearings were an investigation, right? This is like, what is a year and a half ago?
The hearings, by the way, repeat that. The hearings were an investigation. It's not just that the staff work was an investigation, and then they trotted it out in front of the senators who asked prepackaged questions.
No, they really didn't know.
They really didn't know. Howard Baker asking, now I can't remember the man's name. What was it? In any event, when it was spilled in open hearing on live television that President Nixon had a taping system. Nobody knew that until the hearing itself.
Right. So that was drama. This was really a package show. It was pretty good if you're like me and you already agree with it. I don't think it's going to convince anybody. And I think it's only going to remind Americans, and I think it's going to remind American voters that of the two parties, one is living in the past. And you don't want to be living in the past with inflation at 8% and an economy that's sputtering down into a recession and gas prices at $8 in California, $6 everywhere else. You don't want that.
Yes, it's surprising that they didn't put this on the television screens that you have in gas stations now. But even if you did, and you taped people to their cars while they were fueling and opened their eyes like Malcolm McDowell in Clockwork Orange, people would still, their eyeballs would not be fixated on the hearings. It would be going up to the numbers, ticking up and up and up and up as they continue to pump.
By the way, I have it. I just opened it right now. The New York Times website. This is updated 2 hours ago. Prices rise rapidly in May. Live updates. We're now getting live updates on inflation. The inflation rate for the month of May was 8.6%. 8.6%.
Highest since 81.
The highest since 81, exactly.
Here's why this is a diversion, and you're just simply thinking about the wrong things, Peter. A tweet from Matthew Dowd. One party used the fears and frustrations of a group of white working-class voters during a time of economic turmoil and high inflation to overthrow a democracy, and too many other voters were more concerned about inflation than the potential loss of the democracy. 1932 Germany. So if you're waving away January 6th while being fixated on things like the complete, hollowing out destruction of the American economy and the destruction of our purchasing power and the confiscation of our wages by inflation, you don't have your eye on the ball. You have to keep your eye out for Hitler. And I'm not sure if he means necessarily the Hitler we just had or the Hitler to come. You know that, of course, the next guy will be Hitler.
Well, the next Hitler's really bad.
Next Hitler is really bad. I think actually, if you did a search, I may have been the first person to say in the future everyone will be Hitler for 15 minutes, but long time ago.
That could be.
But just as Trump was Hitler, Bush was Hitler before, so we're having an ever escalate. They're gonna have to say Hitler factor what? Hitler X2, Hitler X3. Give us the actual concentration of Hitlers that we're going to be having the next time.
I guess the problem with it is that at no point, it isn't like if you storm the Capitol, you get to then make the laws. That's not how it works. It's not capture the flag. It's like you don't. If the mob had been 10 times the size and had they gone in, just assume they went into the Capitol, they killed everybody. Mm-hmm. They still wouldn't have gotten. They still would not have been able to subvert and take charge. That's not how America works. It's just too. Right. It just isn't. It isn't. So all of the high sort of dudgeon and oh my God, we almost lost our country is really. I think people see through that. Now, I'm not excusing the day, and I'm not excusing the president's behavior, which, as you know, I think he's a lowlife. So I'm not excusing any of that. But as a matter of politics, it's a failure, and as a matter of the historical record, I think it's also a failure because none of it seemed. None of it, the primetime hearings by definition don't seem serious. They seem about publicity, and history is serious and politics is publicity. And I think it failed in both cases.
Right across from where I am right now are the government buildings that were boarded up and behind a chain fence for months, right? And who exactly were they afraid of? Were they afraid of ultra MAGAs? Maybe some Proud Boys, one or two, a sprinkling therein, but they were the people for whom that they were afraid would come and burn them. I turned out to be the constituency, actually, for a lot of the politicians. And again, have they reputed any of this? No, because it was righteous. What happened here, the burning, the looting, the shooting, the rest of it was right. Oh, it got a little out of hand, it got a little zesty, people's high animal spirits, but in its essence, it was righteous. And when you look at Portland, which had a government building under siege with firebombs being thrown into it, seemingly on a nightly basis, and the authorities unable or unwilling to do anything about it, images like that sear into people's memories, I think, a lot more than some Yahoo walking out with a coat rack.
Right. If you ask Americans which political statement they found the most dangerous in the past, just the Trump administration, which sentence they found the most dangerous? Was it any of the crackpot, insane ramblings of a mentally and emotionally unstable president about how he really won a landslide? Or was it 3 words, defund the police? Mm-hmm. If you ask Americans of all stripes, of all races and creeds, which words they thought were the most destructive or the most had the most impact, I think they would have to say, I think politically, I think you can make this argument. I mean, if you're Chesa Boudin, you can make the argument. If you're Mayor Eric Adams, you can make the argument that defund the police had more negative impact on American life and culture and society and future and Americans' way of life and quality of life than the insane ramblings of a mentally and emotionally unstable, unfit president.
3 points about Donald Trump. 1, he came into office claiming that the crowd for his inauguration was the biggest in history. Anybody with eyes for the drone shots of the crowds assembled could tell he's just yakking. His lips are moving. He's not saying anything important. Outrageous, but not important. He goes out of office claiming roughly the same thing, same kind of thing. He won a landslide election.
Sacred
and the
landslide.
third point is he's gone. Now, I know there's some thought about whether he'll run again or not, but right now he's gone. Against that, we're paying $7 a gallon for gas here in Northern California. I know the two of you keep reminding me that I happen to live in the place in America where gas is more expensive than anywhere else.
Yeah, you pay the California premium.
I pay the California premium. Still, gas has doubled since Joe Biden took office. And you mentioned Chesa Boudin. For listeners who don't follow California politics, Chesa Boudin was the progressive, the woke district attorney here in San Francisco who announced that for all kinds of what he considered minor infractions, he would not instruct the police to make arrests. And if the police made a mistake of making an arrest, he would not have his staff bring charges. He reversed the broken windows policing that had done so much to establish safety in our big cities. In other words, low-level disorder, as he viewed it, was unimportant, with the result that we have feces and needles all over the streets of San Francisco, with the result that corner drugstores can barely stay in business because they're being looted again and again. And I shouldn't say looted. There have been lootings, but shoplifting has become totally routine in San Francisco, and on it goes.
Right.
And what happened last week? Actually, I'm sorry, earlier this very week, on June 7th, we had a primary, and this was on the ballot. Chesa Boudin was recalled and yanked out of office by the voters of San Francisco. And if you look at a map, this has gone viral, at least out here. If you look at a map of San Francisco precinct by precinct by precinct, rich white people voted to retain Chesa Boudin, but everybody else wanted him out.
Right. And Coulter, who is, as you know, is our dear friend, my dear friend, who's going to join us next week, I think, on the podcast or pretty soon. And has a podcast of her own, which we are hoping to put on our network soon. Had a very funny joke about Chesa Boudin. She said, well, the good news for him is that his life's not going to change because he still won't be prosecuting any crimes, which is exactly true. And I think that, that's why as the January 6th, 2021 hearings, and I always say 2021 to remind everybody that it was like a year and a half ago. Right. The 2021 hearings were politically, I think, a political mistake, but although maybe just a political necessity for a party that has no other accomplishments. But I think also an historical mistake, because if you really wanted, look, the Bill Barr book, Bill Barr was a guest on this podcast. His book says it all. Like you know pretty much all you need to know. So I'm not sure it accomplished anything it's supposed to accomplish, and it may have hurt them a little bit by just reminding people that they are continually sifting through the clues of yesteryear instead of facing the problems that Americans have right now.
Why are there no homeless encampments in front of the U.S. Capitol? In Venice Beach, your old town, Rob. I'm sorry, I follow these accounts that look at what Venice has become, and the space across from the library was Centennial Park or something like that. Had been completely taken over. There's nothing they could do about it until I guess there was a fire and there was some hazard, and they started cleaning them up, and there was the usual tweet saying that this is absolutely barbaric and the like. But why isn't the area around the U.S. Capitol completely covered with tents? How do they get away with that exactly?
Is that a rhetorical question, or is it a
yes.
Do you know the answer? I don't know the answer.
I don't know the answer. I imagine that there is some instrument that keeps that from happening.
It's a national park.
The Capitol is they've still got a huge boundary around the Capitol building itself. Fenced off with chain link fence, and the Capitol Police are patrolling, and all of this is to create the impression that the Capitol is still under siege, that the barbarians could appear over the horizon at any moment. But there are no homeless people. No. There are very few tourists. You have to stand in long lines anyway.
So what I'm saying, all the consequences of progressive leadership in these cities that we have to deal with, which is the feces and needles, which sounds like something out of a lyric of a.
I saw them open for.
It's more of a feces and needles and all of these
Feces
consequences.
and needles and buttons and bows.
There we are. There's the title of the podcast. The people who vote for these things are insulated from actually their manifestations, whereas the people who don't, or at least the people who vote the same way but have a different way of perhaps defining what is acceptable in the public sphere, vote for them, and then when in San Francisco do you have a sea change where all of a sudden the people who say, okay, I'm going to vote for every single progressive who's on the ballot because there's no other option, but I'm going to draw the line here, as if they expect that when they put the same batch of progressives in, they're going to be somehow motivated by a different way of looking at the world. Because the progressive view right now is that it is humane to let people expire twitching in the street from drugs. Right. That is human. That is freedom, and it is wrong to prosecute anybody who walks into a drugstore and just simply puts everything in a bag because he's probably the spiritual inheritor of Jean Valjean, and we don't want to have that right. Shoplifting to prison pipeline where these people actually suffer consequences. The fact that they've been driven to do this in the first show is consequence enough. But at some point, you have a critical mass of people who say that our cities are becoming unlivable because we have to step over dead people and shite in the streets and needles and the rest of it. And we have to ask them to get out a key to unlock the shampoo.
Right. That's right.
This can't go on. Well, what party, what politician actually steps up and explains what they're going to do to make this stop? Go on, Rob. I'm just predictably
but voters
ranting.
rarely have an opportunity to make a surgical, make their wishes known in a surgical way. Right?
They've had two in California, though. This was one. The school board.
That's right.
Right.
That's
but occasionally they do, and what they really do is they put a head on a pike, right? Because it's easier for voters to say, especially in a progressive place with all sorts of progressive problems. It's easy for them to say, not this guy. They didn't choose anybody. He didn't lose an election. They didn't vote in somebody else. They just said, not him. And part of the benefit of that is that you can kick the can down the road of what to do. But anybody sitting behind that desk knows there's a head on the pike in front of the DA's office, and it's Chesa Boudin's head. And if you want your head on that pike, do what he did. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's not nothing. That's not nothing. That's pretty good, right? Yeah, and that is kind of in this big, broad way that we vote, which is kind of crazy and a little bit large and massive and imprecise. That's about as precise a message as you can send. In New York City, about as precise a message you can send is that most people voted for the former cop guy who talked about law and order. Now, how he governs is something different. Who knows? But they did express a kind of a broad feeling, which is that stick to your knitting, take care of the streets, keep the streets safe, and don't spout nonsense. And the people making
the schools, I think you can add in.
Absolutely. The people making that argument or making that or making that protest the most vocal right now are ethnic minorities in cities. So in New York City, African American women, basically. They were a huge part of Eric Adams's constituency. And
they elected Ron DeSantis.
And they elected Ron DeSantis, right? And in San Francisco, it was the not the rich enclaves, not Noe Valley, not Pacific Heights.
Correct.
But the places around there where people really do experience crime. If you have $1 billion, you don't experience crime. But if you don't, you do. And so that I feel like is that instead of, a smart Democrat is looking at that voter map, the heat map of the American voter right now and saying, we're in trouble and we got to change our, and I think the smart Republicans are doing the same thing. So,
do you think it's possible that what they will do is not actually change their direction in what they do, but simply change their rhetoric? In other words, lie low, don't say the stupid things, behave the same way because you're beholden to a part of the party that believes that homelessness, crime, drug abuse, all of these things are useful manifestations of a corrupt system that has to be washed away. And you don't want to irritate those people. Once you start pushing back against all of the systemic systems that the people are talking about and the usual rhetoric about, then you're in trouble with that base.
So
I mean, sorry, Peter, for just a second.
No, go ahead.
Because Rob has said this, and he's right, that this is a really softball pitch to the Democratic Party, because they can address homelessness, they can address crime, they can address petty crime, all the rest of these things, without selling out their base ideas. If they want to go back to the party that they were once and talk about how they care about crime and safety in the neighborhoods of people, of minority people, if they care about independent businesses, not the big chains with their fascist they can reshape their old idea, their old rhetoric into things that would be palatable to a liberal-leaning audience. But they don't, and they won't, because it seems as if they are constrained by the fear that some Washington Post writer is going to start tweeting mean things about them and consume the weak discourse for that.
Right. Here's a little reason for optimism. At least I'm feeling a little bit optimistic, tiny bit optimistic, for the following reason. During the Trump years, began beforehand, but we saw it vividly, unmistakably during the Trump years, both political parties behaved as if they had consultants, and they probably did have consultants, but they certainly behaved this way, telling them, don't bother trying to reach to the middle. Right. Don't bother trying to expand your base. The name of the game is getting the base you already have to the polls. Agitate them, anger them, excite them, infuriate them, drive your base to the polls. Donald Trump tried it. He believed he got elected that way first time around. He tried it again the second time around, and it didn't work. Now what do we have? Look at the Republican candidates. Mehmet Oz in Pennsylvania. Mehmet Oz knows perfectly well that he has no choice but to reach out to try to expand the Republican base in Pennsylvania. And what's happening with Mehmet Oz, Mehmet Oz is the celebrity doctor who just won the primary for the Republican senatorial nomination in Pennsylvania. Mehmet Oz and Republican candidates around the country are back to the old and healthy game of trying to figure out how to bring more people into their base, how to persuade their neighbors. And the Democrats, as this January 6th committee demonstrates, are stuck with the old game. They're trying to drive up their base. They're not even making an attempt to understand the thinking of the people who are disgusted with them, let alone attempting to reach out to them. So the polls, it's just hard to imagine of course, it's a long time still. It's hard to imagine, though, events that could emerge that will prevent the Republicans from recapturing the House. And that would put Republicans, by the way, I'm going to stipulate for the sake of argument, this is an argument in itself, I'm going to stipulate for the sake of argument that Donald Trump will choose to rededicate himself to the sacred game of golf and remain in Mar-a-Lago. So absent Donald Trump, you've got at least a dozen really smart, very appealing prospective candidates, every one of whom is going to be in the business of reaching out to the middle of the country, of persuasion, which is American politics when it works.
I hope so. I'd bet money on it if I was a betting man. I'm not, though, because I'm sort of penurious and cheap and the rest of it. And I like to think ahead of the financial future, which is why, for example, insurance comes to mind. Because if somebody relies on you financially, and I'm sure somebody does, a parent, a child, a business partner, like Rob, life insurance gives you peace of mind that they have financial cushion if something happens to you, heaven forbid. Typically, life insurance gets more expensive as you age. Makes sense. So it's smart to get a policy sooner rather than later, right? By making it easy to compare your options from top companies, Policygenius can help make sure that you're not paying a cent more than you have to for the coverage that you need. And having life insurance through your job might not be enough. Most people need up to 10 times more coverage to properly provide for their families. So whether you're graduating from school or planning a wedding, welcoming a baby, or switching jobs, now is the time to protect your family's finances. Policygenius is your one-stop shop to find the insurance you need at the right price. Just head to policygenius.com, and you can get started right away in minutes. You can compare personal quotes from top companies to find your lowest price. You could save 50% or more on life insurance by comparing quotes with Policygenius. The licensed agents at Policygenius are on hand through the whole process. They'll help you understand your options, help you make decisions with confidence. And their team works for you. not the insurance companies. Policygenius doesn't add on extra fees. No, they don't sell your info to third parties. And Policygenius has options that offer coverage in as little as a week to avoid unnecessary medical exams, too. So head to policygenius.com to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com. And we thank Policygenius for sponsoring this, the Ricochet Podcast. And now we welcome to the podcast Douglas Murray, the author of 10 books, including The Strange Death of Europe, The Madness of Crowds, and the newly released The War on the West, How to Prevail in the Age of Unreason. He's an associate editor in The Spectator and is considered a leading figure in the ominously called intellectual dark web, which is why probably his Zoom feed has just simply a black room with a strange glowing orb somewhere to it. Well, here we are, the West, the war on, crowds mad, Europe strangely dead, and an age of unreason. How do you prevail in an age when emotion seems to have swamped the gunwales of every single vessel on the sea? And where do we start? Is there one particular type of unreason that if we get our hands around that one and persuade people, that the rest actually will be easier to deal with?
Well, that's a very good question. And there are a couple of very straightforward answers. And let me just give you one. I've had in recent years, through the turmoil and madness that's gone on in Western nations, I've often said that the absolute minimalist suggestion I have had to give readers, friends, and others is the following advice. Don't go mad. Don't go mad. If you can. I mean, maybe you can't help it. But just try not to go mad. Try to hold on to some things. Try not to go all the way down various of the snakes that now exist on particularly the American board game of snakes and ladders. Don't go all the way to the bottom of the board. Try to hold on to something. Now, by the way, there are pieces of advice I give for how to do that. One of them is try to agree on something. And this is something I say in The War on the West. And by the way, one of the interesting things about bringing out a book often is that you discover aspects towards what you've been writing from people in other disciplines that you weren't aware of. And since The War on the West came out, I mean, a couple of groups of people I've heard from in particular, and one of them has been people involved in marriage counseling who have said some of the advice you give is what I recommend to couples. That is, like, try to find things you agree on. And that's one of the pieces of advice I give in The War on the West. One of the reasons why people have gotten so deranged in recent years is because, firstly, they want to hurt their political opponents, not just beat them. They actually want to hurt them. They want to find ways to kick them as hard as possible in the groin. That's a very unpleasant, very demeaning political activity. But the second thing is, people don't agree even on facts. I've said quite often, having different opinions is very last century. In the 21st century, we have different facts. We have different versions of what's just happened. For instance, obviously something going on at the moment. Some people say January the 6th, absolutely nothing to take any notice of, doesn't matter, unbelievable, you're going on about it. And then another group of people say, this is the biggest attack on the American homeland since before 9/11. In fact, it's bigger than 9/11. This was an insurrection. This was an attempt to overthrow the government. I would say try to agree on something. You may not agree on January the 6th. It's in a way, in some ways, it's a bad example. It's so divisive. But try to agree on some things. And one of the things I suggest in The War on the West is, how about coming to some kind of common agreement about our past? And of course, again, that's tricky in certain ways. We're never going to have a single narrative about the past. But for instance, one of the reasons why so many people have found recent years so deranging is because everything in the past has been upended as well. Only a few years ago, you would have been insane to have said the founding fathers were just appalling and there was nothing good to be said about them. You'd be mad. Who would say that? Now, very commonplace. The city in which I'm sitting in New York, the statue of Thomas Jefferson last year was boxed up, winched down, and wheeled out the back door of the council chamber. It had been there since the 1830s, and one of the members of the New York Council who voted to remove the statue of Jefferson said, well, Thomas Jefferson doesn't represent our values. So if you're in that position that as a nation, it's not just you disagree on who didn't win or won the last election or the one before that, or it's not just you can't agree on who's won elections in America or anything else. It's that you don't agree, for instance, that the founding was a good idea. In that situation, absolutely everything on the train underneath you turns to jelly. And of course, people fall through. So as I say, I've discovered that some of the advice I give, find one thing you agree on and work out from there, actually turns out to be very practical advice for people's lives.
I agree. We can agree that there was a date in January that was the 6th. Let's start from there. No, you're absolutely. I mean, when you mentioned what the marriage counselors said, the marriage counselors will tell you that when contempt becomes the operating emotion in a marriage, it's over.
Yes.
And what we have here today are two sides that are not simply left and right with a common core center, but they are contemptuous of each other as destructive elements that cannot be reckoned and bargained with. They just simply have to be vanquished. Peter, Rob,
hey, Douglas, I'm going to be in Washington next week where I'll interview a couple of people, including Christopher Demuth. Now, you've just joined us. You know Chris, or you know who Chris is.
Great admirer of Chris.
All right. So here is what Christopher Demuth, the most urbane, sophisticated man in the conservative movement, has now announced that he considers himself a national conservative. And here are a couple of sentences from a piece he wrote, published late last year in the Wall Street Journal. When the American left was liberal and reformist, conservatives played our customary role as moderators of change. But today's woke progressivism isn't reformist. It seeks to turn the world upside down. When the leftward party in a two-party system is seized by such radicalism, the conservative instinct for moderation is futile. National conservatives recognize that in today's politics, the excesses are the essence. We must shift to opposing revolution, close quote. All right. Now, you have just given us lovely but moderate-sounding advice. It almost sounds as though your advice is, let us return to civility. And as civil a man, as Christopher Demuth said, no, this is a time to fight. What do you make of that? This is a question less of substance than of attitude. What's the correct attitude for our side?
Well, clearly on the conservative side in America, there are, broadly speaking, let's say, of the many divisions you might say exist, one particularly strikes me and it's relevant to this, which is the conservatives who essentially do liberalism at the speed limit, as somebody once said. They slow the liberals down a bit, fight the next battle they know they're going to lose, and much more. That sounds more derogatory than I mean it to be, because it's a perfectly healthy instinct. Is to say that the nature of the dialectic in politics could be that the left puts out ideas, the right says, well, hang on a minute, and refines them and works them, allows some through and doesn't allow others through. That might be one version of the dialectic. However, there is certainly a movement in America, much more so than in my native country of Britain, which says, no, we've been doing that for too long and we've been losing. We've been losing ground all the time. We're not happy just giving in and giving in and giving in. And one of the things, of course, is that they look to, particularly national conservatives, I would argue, look to certain states which don't seem to be doing that. Look to countries which are saying, obvious examples are, say, Poland and Hungary, which are saying, no, we actually are going to fight for our traditions in a conservative way. We're going to put the left on the back foot and much more. And there are many Americans who say that's American conservatives who say that is the position we should be in. And I think it's an understandable thing, because it's not pleasant to always be a loser, for instance. It's not pleasant to feel that you're the one who's always giving in politics any more than in a marriage or relationship. So I understand this instinct. I do think, though, that there are what you have to be aware of if you move the boundaries like this is exactly where you place them. My own analysis is that the boundaries of the right have been slightly inaccurately placed in recent years. People have been put beyond the margins, beyond the wall, as it were, who should not be beyond the wall, who are definitely part of the conversation, who should be part of the story, who have views. I mean, many things I've written about, like immigration, put beyond the wall are people who include quite often the majority of the public. Well, that's not a sustainable position. But the question is, of course, if you move that wall, are you sure you know exactly where you're placing it again? If you expound the barriers, the boundaries on your own political sides, if you expand them, what do you allow in? And this is, of course, this is a work of extraordinarily careful surgery that's effectively needed. Do you move that barrier slightly, that wall slightly, and allow in a significant chunk of the public who must be spoken to and for, and who want things done? Or do you also let the demons in? Do you allow the things that exist to all political sides that effectively trounce and destroy much of that political movement? I'd argue, by the way, that that's obviously one of the things that the Trump era worried people over, which was, the parts of the left and indeed parts of the conservative movement tried to put everybody who supported Trump beyond the pale. I think you can't do that because you're talking here about the American public. On the other hand, occasionally, famously at Charlottesville, famously on January the 6th, people get a glimpse of something that is in the woodshed that suddenly comes out, and it terrifies them, quite understandably. And it terrifies them not least because the political left then says, aha, we told you all along.
Right.
That when the wall is moved slightly, when the boundaries are moved slightly, these are the ghouls that come in. And so, as I say, it's a very, very fine surgical operation that is needed.
Douglas, thank you for joining us. Good to see you again. The problem with American politics is American politics in its DNA at the very beginning is a kind of a built-in compromise. You get about the C plus version, B minus version of what you want, and you're always trading this and that. And the idea of sort of fighting and making an argument in American politics is really about politicking. That's what it is, right? And that's how things get done. If you're LBJ and you want to pass the Civil Rights Act, you have to appeal to Republicans. Republicans helped pass that. Democrats didn't. So you're always kind of horse trading. You're always kind of getting half of what you want.
Yes.
On the other hand, there's another great force in American life, and that's the American culture. And American culture seems to be where, just to sort of take a slightly, not opposite, but maybe different position. American culture seems to be the place where conservatives, in my view, have been happy to fight and complain and to point fingers. I mean, if you want to know what the excesses of the American left are, at any given moment, you can watch Fox News. Fox News is that's its chief item of content is to point and say, look what the crazy lefties are doing. But in the American culture, I was just looked this up. So in the past century, 3 of the biggest mega hits, the Hollywood mega hits of the past century, this century, 21st century, that weren't superhero or fantasy or animation. So just typical movies. Passion of the Christ, American Sniper, and Top Gun this past week. Gigantic hits, which suggests that there's an appetite and a marketplace for American stories that are more or less positive, that are more or less uplifting, that sort of take as the premise that this is a great nation. Hamilton, this gigantic Broadway hit, took as its essence the idea that these men were great men doing great work, thinking big thoughts. They were flawed, but they were passionately consumed with democracy. Gigantic, made $100 million a week, apparently. It's just a staggering amount. People loved it. They ate it up. So my question is really to the conservatives is, all right, well, Michelangelo said you criticize by creating. So now I proved to you there's a market. Go fill it. Why won't they fill it?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Of course, one is that there are some gatekeepers.
Fewer and fewer now. I mean, it's 2023.
Fewer and fewer. The gates are definitely breaking down. But you mentioned the box office, and of course, that's a very, very important. I'd throw a statistic back at you. Of the films that were nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards this year, of all of the films that were nominated for Best Picture, not one was among the top 10 highest grossing films at the American cinema last year.
Right.
Not one.
And that will continue to be the case.
So the Academy Awards, the Oscars and so on, are effectively ceremonies in which actors give awards to other actors who've appeared in films that the public haven't seen.
Yes.
Okay. Not a great business model. At some point, people start to notice that and they take advantage of it. Now, and I'm very pleased that is happening. For instance, Ben Shapiro's outfit, The Daily Wire, is now making content. They're making movies. I think they're going to make kids content as well soon. They're even making products. They're they're making razors now because one of the razor companies boycotted them. So this is a very exciting development, I think, and I want more and more of it to happen. Now, of course, the world I know most is the world of publishing. And I know that in the world of publishing, the gatekeeping, as it were, still exists. When you were kind enough to mention earlier my book, 3 books back, The Strange Death of Europe. Well, The Strange Death of Europe, not sound like I'm blowing my own trumpet, but, as they always say, if I'm not going to, who will?
It's a big deal. Blow your trumpet.
Well, that's very kind of you to say so, Peter. But that book spent 20 weeks in the top 10 of the Sunday Times bestseller lists and was number 1 for quite a long time. And I was approached by a publisher after that who told me something very interesting and absolutely typical, that she had been at a party and she had seen the head of her publishing house and said, have you seen how well Douglas Murray's book on immigration is selling? And by the way, this wasn't an anti-immigration book, as Peter knows, and anyone who's read it knows. It was one that tried to look deeply at the question and didn't worry about saying things that were politically incorrect if they happened to be true. So she says to her boss, have you seen how well Douglas Murray's book is selling? And he says, yes. And she says to him, do you remember I told you we should do something in this area? By which I assume she meant in the area of immigration. And his response was, we wouldn't want those readers. Now, that, to my mind, is a very typical...
Was that American or British?
British, but I think I heard similar stories from America.
Oh, you did? All right.
So the point is that there are people, and I said to her, in which case, do please tell your boss that he must tell the next shareholder meetings that you're a not-for-profit entity. It would be very important to the shareholders to know this fact. But the point is that in culture institution after culture institution, this has been the case for a while. A theatre critic friend of me once brilliantly said to me some years ago, the theatre isn't the theatre anymore, Douglas. And I said, well, what is it? He said, it thinks it's a think tank. I said, this is one of the most perceptive comments about the theatre I'd heard in years. They don't, parts of them want to put on hits, of course, but part of it is, this is your 5 fruit and veg a day. This is what's good for you. Right. Or this is what you need to know or be told. You need to be, the audience need to be scolded until they have all of the correct political opinions. I've seen plenty of that in American theatre in the last year.
All this suggests opportunity, though, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Suggest market opportunity. You throw up. Here in I'm in New York too. You throw a brick, you hit a billionaire, and you're bound to hit a conservative billionaire. There are tons of them, and you're a recently woken up conservative like Elon Musk, right? You're going to hit one. Why is it that they would rather give money to sclerotic think tanks or support books that will appear on, God love him, Tucker Carlson, but his audience already agrees, right? Than to really do something big in the culture, which would require them to sort of do the kind of risk.
Do certain institutions have so much legacy prestige that it's almost impossible to dislodge them from the cultural firmament? Rob's question, a billionaire would probably say, if you gave a conservative billionaire, a chance between owning the New Yorker, the storied New Yorker, or starting some scrappy little conservative thing that's going to be known by everybody as right wing, which would he rather do? Which would make life easier in New York, and which would probably give him a little bit more of a frisson of self-satisfaction? Owning the New Yorker.
Yes, that's true. The nature of success in the conservative movement in recent years in America, in particular, has been scrappy organizations and startups. I think there are obviously now. This isn't an either/or, of course. One of the great successes of American conservatism has also been setting up legacy institutions. There are endless fallouts. Everybody falls out with each other. They disagree about this op-ed. They disagree about that. But they exist, and it gives a certain foundation to conservative American life. On top of that, you then have the sort of upstarts. You have the people who come along and say, no, we want to do something more vigorous than that. And I think this is a great sign of health on the American right. However, the question, I go back to the beginning, is this question of and I've come across this a few times when I've made criticisms of the American right, as I'm very happy to do, as I am with the British right and anyone else I disagree with. I don't feel limited in my range of opportunities to throw invective and criticism. But what I've discovered is that there is now on the American right a very big, particularly on the young right, there's a very big suspicion of anyone who is accused of or seen to be what I just described as gatekeeping. And that can include anyone. So anybody who comes along and says, look, this just isn't the way to do things, or this is beyond the pale. For instance, let me give you a very obvious, very easy example. Marjorie Taylor Greene, when she was criticized earlier this year for speaking at a conference of a horrible little anti-Semite and a bigot called Nick Fuentes, Marjorie Taylor Greene appears on the platform with him, is criticized for it, and says in response, I won't apologize for appearing with, I think she said, vigorous, young, full-blooded conservatives. And I said, vigorous, full-blooded, you bloody idiot. I mean, and I mean, these are, but the point is that there are people on the American right, particularly young American right, who are so fed up of people saying, oh, you can't say that, you can't do that, you can't look into this idea, you can't look into that idea. But effectively, they just say, no, the whole thing's open and no one is allowed to limit us. Now, of course, that really is a problem because they're disproportionately likely to make the same mistakes again that people before them have made. And what I mean by that is, if you decide to go back to the metaphor I said earlier, rather straightforward metaphor, if you decide to lift the barrier, the wall, the gate, whatever, and just allow everything in, you might allow things in that end up meaning you've got to start again. You've got to go through arguments that were settled. You've got to return to the thing of, this is why we don't want Holocaust deniers anywhere near members of Congress, et cetera, et cetera. You don't want to have that. But this is the very delicate moment that American conservatism is at, it seems to me, is that question of the gatekeeping has been annoying. The people who've done it on the right, to the right, have often got it wrong. They've kept off majorities. They've kept out the public. But the response to it has to be incredibly carefully calibrated. I mean, I trust Chris DeMuth enormously. I think he's an extraordinarily kind, decent, generous, and intelligent man. And I would trust Chris DeMuth and many other people to carry out some of that sort of surgery. However, is it always going to be correct? I mean, I have spoken at a National Conservatism Conference, and I had criticisms of a number of people I discovered were also there. This is in Europe and not in America.
Were you at this recent one in Brussels, was it?
No, I wasn't. No, and nothing in the world could induce me to return to Brussels. Nothing in the world. But I did speak at one in Rome, and there were a couple of people there that I was very much in disagreement with and would not have, I don't think I'd have attended if I'd have known were there. But then the European right is even more than the American right in a kind of turmoil here. And I'm not here referring to the British right. The European right, whoa, if you lift up all barriers on the right, wow, there's some ghouls waiting to return.
Yes. Douglas, you have done a remarkable thing, which we haven't mentioned yet. You have moved from the United Kingdom to the United States. You're here now. You live in New York.
Yes.
Why? And if you had to place a bet, apparently you have placed a bet, but if you had to place a bet on the politics of conservatism, the politics of the right, the politics of the West renewing themselves, if you had to place a bet on where the Renaissance was most likely to take place, where would you place your bet? But first, how's New York? How's America? Why did you move?
In a way, it's just an expression of faith. I really am long on America.
All right.
Long on New York.
So you're answering both questions at once. That's your bet.
Well, but a more important point is this, and this might come out. I've got to be careful always to not abuse my host as a guest in this country. But here we go. If you're a writer and you write about issues like I do, you want to go straight to the heart of the problem. America's the heart of the problem. Let me phrase it in another way. In my lifetime, most of our lifetimes, I think America was a net importer of bad ideas. Principally, we might agree, from France. Now, that's changed in recent years. America has become a net exporter of bad ideas. It's one of America's least welcome exports. But, America undergoes some cultural revolution shift, and it happens in all other English-speaking countries. You get the BLM protests in the summer of 2020. They spill straight out into the streets of London, and before you know it, the cenotaph to the dead of world wars and the statue of Winston Churchill are getting attacked in London. Statues of Churchill in Edmonton, Canada, is getting defaced. You see what I mean? The point is that
yes.
And it's the same with everything. The Me Too movement starts in America,
Right.
Bizarrely enough, as I said last week on Bill Maher, bizarrely enough, trying to reform sexual relations between the sexes based on Hollywood. Like, who could see that going wrong? The place that invented the term "the casting couch." Anyhow,
Hey, don't knock it.
Well, I don't make any response to that comment.
That's my rice bowl here.
But you get that starting in Hollywood, and it's before you know it, the defense minister in London has to resign because 20 years ago he's accused of putting his hand on a female journalist's knee. Very British sex scandal because it involved no sex. But the point is that these things all come straight from America to Britain, to Canada, to Australia, New Zealand. So if you're a writer like me and you're interested in ideas, it's very important that Britain does well. It's very important to me personally. It's very important to Britain, obviously. But Britain just culturally is catching secondary infections of American viruses. The central propagator of the viruses of the time, the intellectual viruses of the time, is America. So to that extent, as well as being an expression of trust, it's perhaps a negative thing. I want to be at the center of where the problem is and try to address it here. If Britain does well culturally and much more, it's very, very good for Britain, and it would be a good signifier to America and others. But if America goes south, American politics, American culture goes south, you can't buy yourself very much time in a country like Britain. You really can't.
I interviewed Yoram Hazony a couple of weeks ago, and I said, Yoram, you're so concerned with American politics. Why do you live in Israel? And his answer was very striking. He said he and his wife decided where is the place they could live that would be the most meaningful. And they decided that if they lived in Israel, if they moved to Israel, if they raised their family in Israel, they would be living on the very lip of the volcano.
Yes.
And that's what you were saying about your move to the United States.
Yes.
For an intellectual such as yourself. He, of course, is talking about Judaism as a central part of his concern. But that's what you're saying.
Yes, absolutely. It's the same thing. You might as well be on the cusp of the volcano, as you say. You might as well be looking straight into it, be right on the edge of it, be where the action is. And by the way, I should say something which is quite important to say, and I've said this to a couple of people about the war on the West and what I'm writing about recently, which is this. I'm quite confident, actually, that with the right encouragement, this can all go well. I was speaking the other week to a wonderful young actor called Clifton Duncan, and we were talking about the arts and the arts scene in New York and elsewhere. And, and he was very down on some of this. The plays aren't getting written, the pieces aren't being written, the books aren't necessarily, and I said to him, well, the thing is, Clifton, is that there are people watching. There will be people watching us, as there will be here today. There will be people watching us who will write those plays, and there will be some who will put them on.
Right.
And there will be some who will write those books and write those films. There will be those people in Hollywood who will end up watching this, who will think, yeah, it's true. I mean, there's a massive market out there, and we seem not to be giving them the things that they seem to want. And maybe we should try to have the public on our side. That's a good idea if you're a for-profit entity. And there will be people realizing this, and there are all the time. I was in Los Angeles the other week. I met many people in Hollywood and elsewhere who were very, very, very keen not to propagandize, but to be artistically free, for instance. And as you say with Michelangelo, to create. And I'm this is sort of one of my self-appointed aims, is to try to help clear the clutter and allow people to do these things. And I'm quite confident that they will, because the sort of censorious, often described as woke, I just think anti-Western moment, it's a very unappealing movement. It's a censorious movement. It's effectively a puritanical movement. It's literally an iconoclastic movement. And is that likely to exist forever? No. There will definitely be a counter-reformation. There definitely will be.
The book is fantastic, I should say, for people who.
Thank you.
And I say that I would have bought it, except I got a free copy. So
that's really the terrible thing to say.
It's a terrible thing to say. So I will say this, that I'm going to buy a copy and give it as a gift to my brother who will love it.
Oh,
it's a terrific book, and I can't say enough about it and enough good things about it.
That's very kind. But a friend of mine once said it was the worst thing you can say to an author is, I liked your book so much I lent it to all my friends.
Exactly. I feel the same way. Yeah. Lent it. No, none of that.
Yes.
Or I can't wait to read it. Please send me a copy. That's also a terrible thing to say.
Yeah, that's an awful thing. By the way, also I should mention that it's available on Audible, an audiobook, and read by myself, and is apparently great fun according to the people who listen to it. And it's in its second month now on the New York Times bestsellers for audiobooks.
Audible? Great! I've got a couple of free credits left on Audible. So I was going to buy it, but now I'll just use those free credits.
Well, here's why that kind of counts as well.
Here's why The Strange Death. Here's how I got my copy of The Strange Death of Europe, and this I think all by itself accounts for a large part of the reason that was a bestseller. I got my copy from Rupert Murdoch, who had in his office 3 cardboard boxes filled with it. He'd ordered 100 copies to hand out in meetings. So there you have it.
That's very nice to hear. It's wonderful to, as I say, I really bang on about it, but I've been a writer all my life, now 22 years, 25 years almost actually, from the time I wrote my first book. And the best thing for a writer, as you know, is to have readers. Yes. Or listeners, and it's just it's a wonderful thing, and particularly I should say young readers as well. I have nothing against older readers. Some of my best friends are older readers, maybe all of them. But having young readers is a real honor, and the fact that I go everywhere in the States and I bump into people in the street who are college age, and I say, I've just been listening to your book, I've just been reading your book. It's the best thing ever for a writer, and I don't take it lightly because I've certainly done books in the past that have had fewer readers than these. So right. It's
there is a hunger in the younger demographics for something to give them a tool to fight the unreason that swamps the social media, because the minority dominates. I mean, if Elon Musk bought Twitter, cauterized it, shut it off, I think we'd all be better for it, as much as I love the platform. But there is a small coterie of people who dominate the discourse and shape it and distort it in a way that makes people who would otherwise fight back with reason or looking for a commonality just back off and say it's simply not worth it. So yes, those are the people who are going to love your book, which is War on the West. It's another great one from Douglas Murray. How to Prevail in the Age of Unreason, we should note. And while it's good to have listeners, it's also good to have watchers. And I believe in October, you'll be on Uncommon Knowledge with Peter Robinson to discuss this and more. Yes. So if you like this, and of course, I know you did, stay tuned for that. It'll be another double shot of Douglas, as we used to say on FM radio. We never did. Thanks for joining us today. And
it's a great pleasure.
Welcome to America. And we hope to have you back as soon as possible. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Douglas.
How long must you live in America before we're allowed to refer to you as Doug?
Till the grave.
Thanks for joining us, Douglas.
That's grand.
Great pleasure, Peter.
Or Pete, as we like to call him around here. Right. Actually, no, we don't. Here's the thing. I had a friend after last week's podcast. I had a friend from high school came, and we had lunch. And it was kind of fun because I hadn't seen him in about 10, 12 years or so. And he still called me by the old nickname that we used to call each other in high school. It just slipped out. It wasn't planned. It just some ancient synapse fired and he said it. And there's nobody else on the planet who would call me that particular set of phonemes. And as a reminder, relationships like that, they change over time, but they burnish, they get better. Lots of things do. Your great leather jacket, or your cast iron skillet, your solid wood furniture gets better as you use them. Would you ever think that sheets could be on that list? He said, gently transitioning into a commercial. Well, he did, and I am. And here you go. You know what they are, don't you? They're bowl and branch sheets. Why would we keep talking about them? It's not just because they're buttery and breathable and impossibly comfortable. No, they get soft with every wash. This is just the cool thing. Forget thread count, 9,000 threads. Now, bowl and branch gives you thread quality. Doesn't matter how many threads your sheets have if they aren't the best threads possible. And as I like to say, week in and week out, because Boll and Branch has been with us for a long time, every week my sheets are softer than they were the week before. And you may think, are they gossamer thin? Can you see through them? Are they cheesecloth at this point? What? Can you take hot water and hit them and they'll dissolve? No, they wear like iron, but they feel like silk. Signature hemmed sheets, Boll & Branch. They're a bestseller for a reason. Boll & Branch uses the highest quality threads on the planet for a superior softness and a better night's sleep. Sheets are made with threads so luxurious they're beloved by 2 U.S. presidents. Ha! Kidding. 3 U.S. presidents. They feel buttery to the touch, and they're super breathable, so they're perfect for every season. Hot seasons like this one, oh, they're great. They didn't acquire more than 10,000 seller reviews for no reason. No, when you got the best sheets on the market, people notice. And they are so confident that you'll love them. Boll & Branch will give you a 30-night risk-free trial with free shipping and returns on all orders. And of course, the reason they can do that is because they know that once you sleep on them, you're never going to give them up. So head over to Boll & Branch to get total sleep satisfaction. Get 15% off your first set of sheets when you use promo code Ricochet at bollandbranch.com. That's Boll & Branch, BOLLAND branch.com. Promo code Ricochet. And we thank Boll & Branch for sponsoring this, the Ricochet Podcast. Well, we have a little home talk here. Rob, I noticed that you got in the lawsuit thing. I
try to get that in as much as possible.
As much as possible at the top in relation to absolutely nothing. And I'm sort of and that's great. We can do it again. But are you sort of like wandering around Manhattan, buttonholing people and, strangers at random? And
I will. If it comes to that, I mean, look, we do want to get to the 600th podcast. I'll just put it that way. That is a goal. And it would help us out if you, if you want to help and you've been listening and you have been like looking for the reason to do something. So it would be nice if you helped us now join Ricochet. If you are a member already, please think about giving a gift membership to somebody you know who's like-minded or maybe needs to get persuaded. Membership start at just $5 a month. You could buy a product from one of our sponsors. Our sponsors really do help keep us afloat, and we have pretty good response from them. I mean, we've had some Boll & Branch have been very loyal sponsors for us for a long time. But every little bit helps. So we got to make it a 600 because if we stop at $5.99, we're going to be like a spaceship on the edge of the event horizon of a black hole. Right. Well, we're trying. We're desperately, but you can't. It looks very cool, like a duck. We look very placid on the water surface, but underneath we're pedaling furiously, trying to keep the one step ahead of the sheriff. So go to Ricochet.com/join, get more information. Please join. Also, next week, the Ricochet Hillsdale, DC live taping of the Byron York Show. It's a terrific podcast. Byron York, as you know, is a frequent guest here and I can't think of a better reporter covering national politics than Byron. And he will be there with Molly Hemingway, which is going to be fantastic. It is completely full, but we are told by our partners at Hillsdale that it's sold out in 11 hours. But as always, if you're a member and you want to come, don't despair. Email Alex Rosenwald, alex@ricochet.com, and we will do our best to get you there. We do want you there. We're going to be doing more of these, and they're so much fun. And I actually, Byron and Molly together is sort of a kind of a dream team. And there are, of course, upcoming meetups. If you remember Ricochet, big get-togethers are set for June 25 in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the last weekend in July in Milwaukee. There's another one in the works in Northern California, which apparently is now a hotbed of right-wing revolution. Join Ricochet. Check out the Ricochet meetup group for more details. That's then there in the member feed. We want to see you. We do. This is part of the fun of Ricochet is getting together IRL, as the kids
Yes, say. Indeed. I want to have one here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. That would be fun. I remember doing one in a barbecue joint in Fargo, North Dakota, years and years ago. And that was great fun. So yes, that is the part of the pleasure of Ricochet.
May I ask a Lilacs summer question? Mm-hmm. Is the state fair going to reopen now?
Post-COVID? Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Will it? So you'll be there this summer?
Yes. I haven't actually gone to the fair as a fair goer to just enjoy it in however many years. I go there to work. I've been going there to work year after year after year. And what I do is I stand on a stage and talk to people at the little small stage that we built in front of the Star Tribune building, which is this great big structure. We've been on that site for decades. Right, but do you guess their weight? Anything close to it. I mean, what I have to do is to just do something to bring people by.
Very dangerous.
I used to have a gimmick in as much as we gave away flavored lip balm twice a day, and it was very popular. Every year, people want to know what the flavor is going to be: chocolate chip, grass, traffic cone. I mean, we always have some clever little flavor, and so it would come by. People would come by to get it twice a day. and they would stand in a long line. And so I would have this hundreds of people there waiting for lip balm. They're not there for me. They're there for complimentary emollients. But as long as I have this crowd, you can do something fun with them. And I'd get them all to chant things like, I love the Star Tribune. I want lip balm. I'm not going to pay for it because I'm cheap. And it was great. All hot sun pouring, pounding down. And my people in need of lip balm. I don't have that anymore. They just give it out. This is what it's come to, people. We've lost all of our standards.
No more swag.
They
No more
hand
lilac
it
swag.
out to anybody who walks by. So I have to come up with something else. So one of the things that you've been able to get at the State Fair every single year is a fluorescently hued yardstick. And you can find them over there at the gas place where they teach you, who to call before you dig. And for some reason, there's this connection between fluorescent yardsticks and the gas people. It's been there cemented for decades. So I have one of these every time I get up there, and then I try to engage people in fair trivia. Where was this? Where? And I tell a story about the fair. Then I hand them the magic divining fluorescent yardstick, and they and have them point in the direction in which they think this thing happened. So it's like trivia, and they can fake it, and I can also fake it by helping to guide their dowsing rod in the proper direction. And it's great fun. But every day when you go to the fair and stand on that stage at noon every day for 10 days, it gets a bit tiring. And I wish that I would actually just kind of go to the fair to enjoy it. I do want to say that when I die, I want somebody to put up a State Fair bench with something on it that relates to my long tenure there. You can do that. You can buy a bench, and I think it's made out of recycled, milk cartons or something like that has your name or your family emblazoned on it, so that people can sit down and rest with their back to your name and enjoy something that you gave future generations. And believe me, this year, if it's going to be as hot as I think, it's going to be a perfect day to go to the fair. But it gets boiling, as I said, and you want to sit down in the shade, and you always want to find. It's the same at home. I mean, we sit outside. We've got a gazebo, and it's great. And I love to enjoy this outdoor weather. I just have a problem that one of my sofas is falling apart. And that's a problem because 93% of your life is spent indoors, right? But so many of our favorite moments are outdoors. The fresh air, the feeling of peace. Since warmer weather is upon us, let's make the most of it with Outer. Outer is the new outdoor furniture company with purposely designed furniture to get you outdoors more. In your gazebo or, wherever you happen to be this summer. Outer makes the world's most beautiful, comfortable, innovative, and high-quality outdoor furniture, all from sustainable materials, and it's the only outdoor furniture with a patented built-in cover. Built in, that's great. Doesn't blow away. You don't have to hunt for it, and it makes protecting it effortless. From teak chairs to fire pit tables, everything Outer make, it's got the look and feel of what you'd expect at a 5-star resort, but for less than you'd pay at a big box store for something that won't last. It's cheap. Trust me, I bought those things. They're cheap. They don't last. Outer is better in every way. They've spent years perfecting outdoor products with stunning modular designs to customize your space, life-proof material with a nano coating that's water, mold, bleach, and stain resistant, and triple memory foam cushions that are comfier than most indoor sofas. It's the how did nobody think about this before invention that made Shark Tank's Laurie Grenier and Mr. Wonderful fight to invest in Outer. They have over 1,000 neighborhood showrooms across the country, by the way, where you can see the Outer difference in person. And you just have to visit Outer's virtual showroom if you're not around one of those. They've got these stunning displays that'll inspire the feng shuiist in you. Outer furniture comes with the best in-class warranties, like 10 years for their chic aluminum line and a 2-week free trial with free returns. How can you lose? You can't. So see the difference at liveouter.com/ricochet. Plus, for a limited time, get $300 off and free shipping. This is Outer's best offer anywhere. You're not going to get it anyplace else. And it's only available to podcast listeners and only for a limited time. $300 off and free shipping at liveouter.com/ricochet. liveouter.com/ricochet. And terms and conditions apply. And we thank Outer for sponsoring this, the Ricochet Podcast. Peter, you gave everybody a vocabulary lesson.
I did.
Would you like to read it?
I'd be happy to read it. I don't quite know what came over me, but Fay Vincent, the late baseball commissioner, wrote a sweet, sweet appreciation in the Wall Street Journal of the late Roger Angell. Now that I say the word out loud, I don't know whether I'm pronouncing it correctly. Was it Angel or Angel? I don't know. In any event, this man who was... Angel, thank you. Roger Angell, who was E.B. White's stepson and had worked at the New Yorker magazine. Yes,
I did not know that.
His mother was E.B. White's second wife, and Roger Angell was raised from boyhood by E.B. White. And Roger Angell himself became a writer in much the style of E.B. White, wry, amusing, informative. And he died a couple of weeks ago at the age, as I recall, of 102. And he was active writing baseball pieces were his kind of signature work. He was an active member of the staff of the New Yorker into his 90s. And Fay Vincent wrote that Roger Angell was, quote, fascinated and bemused by baseball, close quote. And I wrote a letter to the editor saying, may I offer a word of gratitude to Fay Vincent? That's the first correct use of bemused that I've come across in about a decade. And I sent it off, and to my astonishment, they actually printed the darned thing. And this is just such a pet peeve. This is a little teeny, tiny pet peeve. In fact, it shows what a peevish person I am. I am so tired of having bemused, confused with amused, as if it's some sort of slightly lesser degree of amused.
Yeah, it's like a condescending amused.
It's a wry, sophisticated.
Yes,
right. Niven would be bemused by your manners.
It just doesn't mean that at all.
And that's that's the one that gets you?
That's the one that gets me. That, and I have to say, I once became agitated enough to do a search. I was going to buy a website, and I was going to launch something called the Society for the Preservation of Strong Verbs. So, for example, it's not he dived, it's he dove. It's not he sneaked up behind me, it's he snuck up behind me. A strong verb is a verb that makes the past tense by an internal vowel change and not by adding ed. And it's the whole movement of modern English to eliminate them and stick on ed. And that annoys me. It just deprives the language of a kind of sweet richness. To my amazement and pleasure, I discovered that the Society for the Preservation of Strong Verbs already exists.
Well, I don't know whether you should be bemused by that. Mine. I have two thoughts. One is I had a writing. She wasn't a writing teacher. Actually, she was a professor at college who was his English language historian and a poet. And
This is not Harold Bloom.
No, not Harold Bloom. It's Marie Boroff, and she did a wonderful translation, essentially, from the Middle English of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And she did the history of the English language. And she always said, "Look, if you ever want to just turbocharge your writing," I shouldn't use that phrase, but at all, use Anglo-Saxon words.
Yes.
And don't use the Latinate, because English is so rich, it has versions of everything. So don't say royal, say kingly.
Yes.
And it just, your writing just instantly gets elevated and has more impact. And then the second thing is I guess I'm not as bemused. I accept that as your current obsession, but mine remains disinterested, uninterested, because it seems to remove the word, the meaning of disinterested from the vocabulary. So you can't say I'm looking. Well, I think people sometimes say disinterested when they mean uninterested. Like you do not want to judge
disinterested
who is uninterested.
Means impartial, right?
Yes, who doesn't have an interest in it. Like
yes.
And you don't want to judge who's uninterested, but you do want to judge who's disinterested.
Yes.
And that to me is, or for that matter, unorganized, disorganized are two very different things. But for me, that's the one that sets my hair on fire, is the disinterested, uninterested.
In a related concept, Google this week released a list of all the map of the states, and they printed all the states that people Google the spelling for, the word that people Google the spelling for. Because Google knows everything, right? Because sometimes you're stuck on a word, and the best way to do it is to ask Google to type it in, or to say, what is the spelling of, and it'll correct it for you. And the results were mystifying to me. Now, some of them I get. Florida, for example, was testing the spelling of separate, and we all hang, at least I do. I look at separate, and is that an E? Is that an A? An A? An E? It doesn't look right either way. Texas, the word that they wanted to know the spelling of was normal. Okay. Wisconsin was stumped by the spelling for lose, L-O-S-E, and was one of 3 states that was actually troubled by a word that had fewer letters. North Dakota did not know how to spell sorry. South Dakota was baffled by beautiful. Nebraska by beautiful.
Beautiful's tricky.
It can be. It can be.
All right.
Minnesota, in this one, just absolutely paparazzi. Okay, now I can understand where the word might confound some people, but we have absolutely no cause to use it here because we haven't any celebrities. But I
think people want to know want to order that dish at an Italian restaurant,
or if paparazzi's is it's a pizza joint that on
extra cheese,
somewhere.
Like
they're looking for the phone. They're looking for the phone number. But my favorite was West Virginia because the thing apparently that people in West Virginia Google the most to find the spelling for was West Virginia, which is wonderfully self-referential. I mean,
wow.
Put it on the license plate, the tautological state. There we go. Anyway, so we could go on for words and words and words forever, but we probably should say before we leave that we must confess to being probably more fascinated by the Washington Post drama than the rest of the country, and that says something about us. That we all are sort of still drawn to the insular doings of the
Can
paper.
one of you just sum that up for me? I keep getting bits and pieces of it in my Twitter feed, but I do not understand quite what happened. I need a very brief explainer.
Guy on staff retweets joke. Joke is problematic. Woman on staff, I am assuming, woman on staff objects to his retweeting, starts brouhaha, plugs it into context of women facing problems at the Post.
Oh.
Male reporter is suspended without pay for a month. Woman continues to go on a 7-day long, I wouldn't say tirade, because that would be sort of insulting. Hysterical, no, you can't say that. Is angry at Post for things and calls out other colleagues. Other colleagues respond. Colleagues are also called out by her. Then
all on Twitter, all taking place in public.
Right. Then everyone at the paper decides this is nonsense. This looks bad for the paper. And everyone who works there starts tweeting about how they enjoy it. It's collegial. It's collaborative. It's supportive. They like the Post. Another Post reporter does a survey of all these people and says, isn't that interesting? They're all white and they're all well paid. End result. Company says, this is ridiculous. We look like fools in public. We are tired of this reporter. She's been bad-mouthing staff. She's fired, and they fire her. So she will begin her second lawsuit against the Washington Post probably pretty soon. Rob, does that seem to sum it up?
Yeah, that's basically it. I mean, I'm as out of it as anyone else. I can't bestir myself to care or to even follow it.
What, you're disinterested? I'm not, because this is my industry, and I've noticed that my newspaper actually has avoided this kind of psychodrama, and I think the reason is because we're not full of Ivy League graduates. I think young people or people in their 30s who've come out of these institutions and lived in East Coast media bubbles for an awful long time and have never had to confront anything except the cultures that they've been marinating in for 15 years, act like this. They play out these particular pointless psychodramas on Twitter, and it's amusing to the rest of us. But the people who went to community college or land-grant colleges or the rest, or worked through college and did waitress jobs or waiter jobs or the rest of it, have a little bit more grounding and don't go on these things. So, the newsrooms that I grew up in ranged from slangy places where everybody was sleeping, drinking, to the tired places of today that seem like quiet insurance offices. But these places sound like nightmares to me, just minefields of other people's emotions. And no. Then again, I'm in a newsroom that has, at the moment, 3 people in it. Thank you, China. That'll do, won't it?
That'll do.
Policygenius, we thank them. Boll and Branch, we thank them too. And Outer, support them for supporting us. Great idea. And join Ricochet today. Both of these things will help us survive to number 600, as will a 5-star review in Apple Podcast. By the way, you can leave that. It allows new listeners to discover us, keep the show going. But you matter the most. Your listening, your patronage, your membership. Peter, Rob, it's been great. And thank you, everybody. We'll see you in the comments at Ricochet 4.0.
Next week, fellas.
Yeah, next week. But in the meantime, they wear like iron, but they feel like silk. I am informed by Blue Yeti that James just came up with that. That wasn't in the copy. I think Boll and Branch should include a little extra premium for that. That is a brilliant line. Next week, boys.
If they want to include the premium, I'll sign the check over to Ricochet.
All right. Next week.
Ricochet. Join the conversation.